I'm a 29-year-old guy, and about a year ago I went through what felt like the most peaceful breakup ever. I had been with Emily for 3 years, but things just weren't clicking anymore. We weren't fighting or anything dramatic like that, we just drifted apart. We both agreed that it was time to call it quits. No bad blood, no hard feelings. At least that's what I thought at the time. Emily wasn't in the best place financially when we split. She had lost her job a few weeks before, and things were pretty rough for her. She couldn't afford her rent, bills were piling up, and it seemed like life had thrown her one curveball after another. Even though we were no longer together, I didn't feel right just leaving her like that. I figured we spent 3 years together, and I cared about her as a person, so I decided to help her out. I found her a decent apartment, lent her some cash to cover the initial expenses, and even helped her move in. I guess part of me felt responsible, like maybe if we hadn't broken up, she wouldn't be in this situation. Around the same time, my best friend Arthur moved back to town. We've been friends since we were kids, and we'd always been close, but we kind of lost touch when he moved away a few years back. His return felt like perfect timing. I introduced Arthur to Emily, figuring it'd be good for her to have more people around, especially since she didn't have a strong support network at the moment. We all started hanging out more often, dinners, casual meetups, the usual stuff. For the first few months, everything was smooth. Emily found a new job, started paying me back the money I lent her, and seemed to be thriving. I was genuinely happy for her. She was putting her life back together, and I was glad that I could be a part of her getting back on track. Arthur, on the other hand, was around more and more. He and Emily started getting close, but I didn't think much of it at first. I had moved on emotionally, so seeing them together didn't really bother me. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. It wasn't until I noticed the little things that I started feeling uneasy. Arthur and Emily would exchange these inside jokes, the kind that made me feel like I was missing out on something. They were texting each other a lot more frequently, and whenever we hung out as a group, there was a spark between them that wasn't there before. I brushed it off as paranoia. I mean, I had no reason to think anything was happening, right? We were all friends. One night though, things shifted. We had all gone out for drinks, and afterward, I decided to head back to Emily's place with them. When I walked into the living room, Arthur and Emily were sitting a little too close for comfort, talking quietly. The whole vibe was off. They immediately jumped up when I came in, acting like nothing was happening, but the tension in the room was hard to ignore. I didn't say anything, but it was the first time I seriously questioned whether something was going on. After that, hanging out with them became awkward. It felt like I was the third wheel, even though we were supposed to be just friends. The vibe between the three of us was different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pushed to the sidelines. Still, I kept convincing myself that I was overthinking it. I mean, I didn't have romantic feelings for Emily anymore, so why should it matter if she and Arthur were getting closer? But it did matter. The more I thought about it, the more it started eating at me. I felt weird, like I was losing two important people in my life at the same time. I didn't want to believe that they were hiding something from me, but the signs were there. Eventually I decided to confront Arthur. It was an awkward conversation, to say the least. He downplayed everything, saying they were just friends, and that I had nothing to worry about. He even told me that he would never cross that line without talking to me first. I wanted to believe him, but something still didn't feel right. Emily, on the other hand, stayed completely silent. She never brought up the topic, even though she had to know that I was starting to feel uncomfortable. We had been through so much together, and I thought we could be open with each other. But the fact that she wasn't saying anything only made things worse. So I started pulling back. I distanced myself from both of them, focusing on my own life. I got busy with work, picked up some new hobbies, and tried not to think about it too much. But the nagging feeling that something was going on between them wouldn't go away. I didn't have any concrete proof, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was being left out of something. Then, one morning I woke up, scrolled through Instagram, and there it was. Emily had posted a picture of her and Arthur together, looking way too close for comfort. The caption was vague, but the message was clear enough. My stomach dropped. Whatever was going on between them, it was more than just a casual friendship. That's when it all clicked for me. Update 1. About a week after I saw that Instagram post, Arthur hit me with the news I had been dreading, but also kind of expecting. He and Emily were officially dating. He told me in person, which I guess I should appreciate, but it didn't make the situation any easier. He seemed uncomfortable, like he knew it was going to hit me hard. I stood there, letting him explain, trying to keep my cool, but inside I was fuming. All I could think about was how fast everything had escalated between them. I didn't lash out or make a scene. I just listened. Arthur said something about how their connection had grown stronger over time, and how it wasn't something they had planned. He kept repeating that they didn't want to hurt me, but it was hard to hear any of that, when all I could focus on was the fact that my best friend was dating my ex. I didn't know what I was supposed to say, so I just nodded and walked away, leaving him standing there awkwardly. After that I knew I had to confront Emily. I wasn't going to let this whole thing go without hearing her side. When I met up with her, she told me the same story, how it just kind of happened, and that they didn't mean for it to go this way. She said they tried to fight the connection at first, but it became too strong to ignore. She swore that they didn't mean to hurt me, but they felt like they had a right to explore their relationship. I didn't blow up at her either. I just felt drained by the whole situation. It was a strange feeling. On one hand, they were both adults, and technically they had every right to date each other. I wasn't with Emily anymore, and I had been trying to move on. But on the other hand, it felt like a massive betrayal from two of the people closest to me. They both acted like they hadn't done anything wrong, which only made me feel more conflicted. Was I being unreasonable, or were they really crossing a line? When word started getting out among our friends, the reactions were split. Some people were on my side, saying it was shady for Arthur to date my ex, especially without being upfront from the beginning. Others thought I was making too much of it. They kept telling me that since I wasn't with Emily anymore, I had no reason to be upset. It was a classic case of move on versus this is messed up. My family had their own take on it. My sister was furious when she found out. She kept going on about how Arthur had broken some unspoken bro code by going after my ex. She didn't trust Emily either and kept pushing me to cut them both off completely. My parents were a bit more laid back, but even they suggested that maybe I should take a step back from Arthur for a while. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and I didn't know which one to follow. Eventually I decided to focus on myself. I needed space, so I started distancing myself from Arthur and Emily. I hit the gym more, took up a few new hobbies, and even went on a couple of dates. I tried to keep busy and move on from everything, but the truth was, I still felt the sting of betrayal, no matter how hard I tried to distract myself. It didn't help that both Arthur and Emily reached out to me not long after. Arthur was the first to apologize. He admitted that he hadn't handled things the best way and said that he valued our friendship. He even mentioned that he hoped I could come to terms with their relationship because they were serious about each other. Emily texted me not long after that, apologizing again. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she didn't want to lose our friendship. She asked if we could at least be civil, but at that point, I didn't know if I could do that. I started to feel really isolated. These were the two people I had been closest to, and now they were building a life together, while I was on the outside, trying to figure out where I stood. Group hangouts that used to be fun and easy suddenly became awkward, or just stopped happening altogether. I didn't feel welcome anymore, and it was clear things were never going to go back to how they used to be. To make matters worse, some of our mutual friends started making passive-aggressive comments in group chats. People I thought I was cool with were suddenly acting like I was the one being difficult for not accepting the situation. The social pressure was getting to me, and I realized that my circle of friends was slowly shrinking. Then came the final blow. One day I checked my mail and found a wedding invitation. Arthur and Emily were engaged. It was like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even fully processed the fact that they were dating, and now they were getting married? The whole thing felt like it was happening way too fast. I didn't know whether to be angry, sad, or just numb. A part of me wanted to just forget the whole thing, but how could I when I was constantly being reminded of it? And now I had to decide, do I go to the wedding and face the awkwardness, or do I cut ties for good? Update 2. When I got that wedding invitation in the mail, it felt like a punch to the gut. Arthur and Emily's names together, printed neatly on the card, with a date 6 months away, didn't just sting, it ripped open everything I thought I had managed to bury. How had it all escalated this quickly? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they were just officially dating now, they were planning a wedding. It all seemed like too much, too fast. I had known them both for years, and somehow I couldn't wrap my head around how easily they could move forward, while I was left behind in the wreckage. I wasn't sure if I could even go. The idea of sitting there, watching them exchange vows, surrounded by mutual friends and family, made my stomach churn. But at the same time, avoiding the wedding felt like I was giving up or letting them win, like I was conceding defeat in some twisted game none of us ever signed up to play. A few days later, I confronted Arthur about the engagement. He told me that he had planned to tell me before the invites went out, but there was a mix-up with the mailing, and it got sent out too early. He seemed awkward, like he knew how badly it looked. He downplayed the whole thing, telling me that when you know, you just know, and that things between him and Emily had progressed naturally. I just stared at him, trying to find any trace of the friend I used to know, the guy who would have given me a heads up before all this chaos. But that guy wasn't there anymore. All I could do was walk away before I said something I couldn't take back. Emily reached out again too, apologizing, but this time it felt more defensive. She told me that their relationship had developed organically, and hoped I could be happy for them. The more she spoke, the more it felt like she was just trying to justify everything, as if her explanations would magically erase how fast they'd moved on from our breakup. It didn't sit right with me, but what could I even say at that point? My family was furious when I told them. My sister had been vocal from the start about her distrust of the whole situation, and now she was adamant that I shouldn't even consider going to the wedding. She thought Arthur had crossed every boundary imaginable. My parents were more diplomatic about it. They didn't outright tell me to cut him off, but they definitely hinted that it might be time to rethink our friendship. Their reactions didn't help with the confusion swirling in my head. Things only got more complicated when our mutual friends started chiming in. Word spread fast, and pretty soon everyone had an opinion. Some people thought I needed to let it go and move on since Emily and I were no longer together. Others agreed with me that it was messed up how quickly they had rushed into the engagement. It felt like people were picking sides, and I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. I was caught between wanting to move forward with my life and feeling like I was drowning in everything that had happened. To distract myself, I threw myself into work, trying to avoid thinking about the wedding altogether. I even started dating again, but none of it seemed to stick. Every date felt like a flimsy band-aid covering a wound that hadn't healed yet. The thought of the wedding loomed over everything, no matter how hard I tried to focus on other things. In the middle of all this, a job offer came my way, one that would mean moving to another city. It was a big promotion, something I had been working toward for years. It felt like the perfect opportunity to escape everything, to leave behind the memories, the awkwardness, the betrayal. But accepting the job also meant leaving my hometown, the place where I had grown up, where my family and friends were. It wasn't an easy decision. Then, as if the universe wanted to throw one more wrench into things, I ran into Emily at a coffee shop. Of all the places, and of all the times, it had to be there. The encounter was brief, but the awkwardness hung in the air, like a bad smell. She was all smiles, talking about wedding planning and how excited she was, while I just stood there, nodding politely. trying not to let the conversation drag on. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. A few days later, Arthur texted me, asking if we could catch up over a drink. I stared at the message for a long time before deciding to decline. I couldn't do it. Seeing him after everything that had happened just didn't sit right with me. Arthur didn't push it, but I could tell from his tone that he was disappointed. One of our other friends tried to give me some unsolicited advice, suggesting that maybe going to the wedding would give me closure. According to him, avoiding it would only make things harder in the long run. I didn't respond to that advice, but it stuck with me. Part of me wondered if he was right. Memories of my time with Emily and my friendship with Arthur kept flooding my mind. I remembered all the good times we had shared, but they were tainted now, overshadowed by everything that had gone down between the three of us. It was hard to shake the feeling of betrayal, no matter how much I tried. After days of going back and forth in my head, I finally made a decision. I sent Emily and Arthur a message, congratulating them on their engagement but letting them know that I needed space. It was polite but firm. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Once I sent that message, I started seriously considering the job offer again. Moving to a new city, starting fresh, it felt like the escape I desperately needed. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to truly move forward from the mess my life had become. Update 3. May. After thinking it over for what felt like forever, I finally made the decision to accept the job offer and move to a new city. It wasn't an easy call, but I knew deep down that it was the only way to really move on and start fresh. Staying here, surrounded by constant reminders of Arthur and Emily, just wasn't something I could keep doing. So, with 2 months left before their wedding, I started making arrangements for the move. I put in my notice at work, started apartment hunting, and even began packing up my things. My family was on board with the move from the beginning. They could see how much the whole situation had worn me down, and they were supportive of anything that would help me get back on track. But not everyone saw it that way. A few of my friends weren't exactly thrilled with the idea. They acted like I was running away, abandoning our friend group. They didn't get that this wasn't just about a job or leaving town, it was about my mental health. I tried to explain, but some of them just didn't want to hear it. Even though I had resolved to leave, the guilt about skipping the wedding still lingered. I kept thinking about whether I should send them a gift, or maybe write a short letter to wish them well. Part of me just wanted to close that chapter cleanly, but another part didn't want to open any door that might suck me back into the drama. And just when I thought I had made peace with the decision, Emily messaged me again. This time her tone was different, more desperate. She asked me to reconsider, saying it wouldn't feel right without me at the wedding. It threw me off. After everything that had happened, she was still reaching out, still trying to get me to be there for her big day. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I had already made my boundaries clear, but on the other hand, I didn't want to hurt her any more than I already had by distancing myself. I decided to start seeing a therapist to help me sort through all these complicated feelings. Talking it out really opened my eyes to how much I'd been stuck between a rock and a hard place with both Arthur and Emily. The therapist helped me focus on what was best for me, not what I thought others expected. Slowly, I started to feel more confident in my decision to leave, even if it meant missing the wedding. A week before my scheduled move, Arthur called out of the blue. He wanted to meet up one last time before I left. I hesitated, but eventually agreed, figuring it might give me some closure. We met at this old bar we used to go to all the time. From the moment I walked in, it was awkward. Neither of us knew what to say at first. Eventually, Arthur broke the silence, apologizing for how things had gone down. He said he never wanted to hurt me, but then he started justifying his relationship with Emily, saying that love doesn't follow rules. Listening to him, something clicked. As he talked, I realized that I had been holding onto the past way too tightly. This wasn't just about Arthur and Emily's relationship or how it felt like a betrayal, it was about how much of my life had been wrapped up in theirs. For the first time, I felt ready to let it all go. It wasn't about forgiveness or even understanding, it was about finally putting myself first. We finished our drinks, and when we parted ways it was clear that our friendship would never be the same. Arthur looked defeated, but for me there was a strange sense of relief. I knew I was making the right decision by moving on, both literally and figuratively. The next few days were a whirlwind of packing and saying goodbyes. As I boxed up my things, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed over the past year. I was leaving behind so much: my ex, my best friend, and the social circle that had been such a big part of my life. But for the first time in months, I actually felt hopeful about the future. This move was my chance to start over, to rebuild without the weight of everything that had happened. The night before I left, my family threw me a small going-away party. It was bittersweet. They were proud of me for taking control of my life, but there was an unspoken sadness about it too. I guess we all knew that things were never going to be quite the same after this. The day before my move, I got one final message from Emily. She said she understood why I needed space but hoped that one day we could reconnect. I read it a few times, but in the end, I didn't respond. I wasn't ready for that, and I wasn't sure if I ever would be. Early the next morning, I packed up my car and hit the road. As I drove through town, passing familiar places, I felt a wave of nostalgia. Every street, every building brought back memories, some good, some not so good. But as I crossed the city limits, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. I was finally leaving it all behind. When I arrived in my new city, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The fresh start I had been craving was finally here. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Arthur, or Emily, or everything that had gone wrong. I was just thinking about what was ahead. I was ready to start a new chapter, free from the baggage that had been holding me down. Update 4. The day of Arthur and Emily's wedding came and went, but I was far away, settling into my new city and new life. I had made a point to avoid checking social media or reaching out to anyone from back home. I didn't want to know how the wedding went, who was there, or how everyone looked. For the first time in months, I felt at peace, completely disconnected from the whirlwind of drama that had consumed me for so long. A few days after the wedding, I got an unexpected text from one of our mutual friends. Apparently the wedding didn't go as planned. There had been some major drama that I had missed by not being there. The friend didn't give me any details, just a vague "you wouldn't believe what went down," but even that was enough to pique my curiosity. Still, I wasn't about to go digging for answers. I had left that part of my life behind, and I wasn't planning on getting dragged back into it. But then, later that day, Emily sent me a message. It was cryptic, something along the lines of, "Things didn't go how I expected. Can we talk?" I stared at my phone, debating whether or not to respond. A part of me wanted to ignore it and keep moving forward, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to hear her out, mostly because I needed to know what had gone so wrong at their wedding. When we finally talked, what she told me left me completely speechless. She confessed that, during the wedding, as she stood there at the altar, she had a full-blown emotional breakdown. She couldn't stop thinking about our past, about everything we had shared, and how things ended. She admitted that a part of her had never fully moved on from me. She said it hit her all at once while standing there in front of everyone, promising her life to Arthur. Apparently she had struggled to hold it together through the whole ceremony, and afterward, Arthur noticed. According to Emily, Arthur confronted her after the ceremony. He had seen the hesitation in her eyes and asked her point blank if she still had feelings for me. That led to a huge argument between them, right after their wedding. Emily said they went through with the wedding, but things had been tense ever since. Their relationship wasn't as perfect as it had seemed, and the cracks were beginning to show. I didn't know what to say. I was stunned. After everything that had happened, I never expected Emily to still have feelings for me, especially after rushing into things with Arthur. Part of me felt vindicated, like maybe I hadn't been the crazy one after all. But mostly I was just confused. How could she still have these lingering feelings after everything that had happened? And what was I supposed to do with this information now? Emily apologized again, but this time it felt different. She admitted that she might have rushed into things with Arthur, because she didn't want to be alone, and in the back of her mind, I had always been the one that got away. She said she regretted not being more honest with herself, and with me before things spiraled out of control. It was hard to hear, but at the same time it felt like closure, something I hadn't realized I needed until that moment. A few days later, I got another message, this time from Arthur. He wanted to talk too. He didn't go into detail, but from the way he worded it, it was clear that things between him and Emily weren't as solid as they had seemed. He hinted that he was starting to have doubts about their relationship. He wanted to meet up and clear the air, but I wasn't sure if I could handle it. Suddenly I found myself caught between two worlds again. On one hand, I had moved on and started fresh in my new city, but on the other hand, both Arthur and Emily seemed to be dragging me back into their drama. I didn't want to be pulled back into that toxic cycle, but a part of me felt like maybe I owed them one last conversation. After all, they were both reaching out, and it wasn't like I could just ignore the fact that their relationship had been built on shaky ground. I brought it up with my therapist during our next session. I explained how conflicted I was, how part of me wanted to stay distant, but another part of me felt responsible for everything falling apart. My therapist reminded me that this wasn't my burden to carry. She advised me to focus on my own well-being and not let myself get sucked back into their mess. The therapist made it clear, I had done the work to move on, and getting involved again would only hurt my progress. It was decision time. I realized that getting pulled back into Arthur and Emily's chaos wasn't going to help anyone. They needed to figure things out on their own, and I needed to protect the peace I had finally found. So I made the decision to cut ties with both of them for good. I sent them each a final message, wishing them well but making it clear that I couldn't be part of their lives anymore. I didn't want to be the third wheel in their relationship drama, and I certainly didn't want to be the person they kept turning to when things got messy. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly at peace. I had made the right decision by walking away, and now I was ready to fully embrace my new life without the weight of my past dragging me down. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way to move forward. With Arthur and Emily behind me, I finally felt free, ready to focus on myself, my new job, and the future I had in front of me. The chapter was closed, and I was ready to start writing a new one.